I am Junior, 25 years old, and I still remember the exact moment my family betrayed me. After a weekend away, I walked into my childhood home to find my room completely gutted. My sister was sleeping peacefully in what used to be my bed. When I asked my mother what was happening, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "We voted. You're out." I turned around, keys in hand, and walked away without a word. 9 months later, I had 59 voicemails from her, each starting with the same line: "We made a mistake." I called her and announced something that changed everything. Before I get into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if family drama gets your attention. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home in Denver, Colorado, I never imagined my family would one day vote me out of it. We were the Walkers' mom, Rachel, dad, Frank, me, and my younger sister, Megan, who is 21 now. We were normal, happy, even until Dad passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack. His death changed everything in ways I never anticipated. I work as an IT specialist for a cybersecurity firm downtown. The pay is decent enough that I could have moved out years ago, but after Dad died, I chose to stay. Mom was devastated by his passing, and our family finances took a hit without his income as a construction manager. It made sense for me to remain at home helping with bills while saving for my own place someday. At least that was the plan. Dad and I had always been close. He taught me everything about responsibility, hard work, and looking after family. Junior, he would say, a man stands by his family when times get tough. I took those words to heart, perhaps too literally. After he was gone, I tried to fill the gap he left, especially in supporting Mom financially and emotionally. I paid half the mortgage-covered utilities and even helped with Megan's college tuition when Mom couldn't manage it. The first year after Dad died was about survival, all of us moving through grief in our own ways. The second year felt like adaptation, finding a new normal. But the third year, things began to shift in ways I didn't immediately recognize as dangerous. Megan had always been the baby of the family, Dad's little princess. She was 17 when he died, and his absence affected her deeply. Initially, she withdrew, became quieter, more studious. But as time passed, something in her changed. The entitled behavior started small, expecting me to drive her places without notice, borrowing money, without asking, leaving messes for others to clean up. Mom excused it all. "She's still processing her grief," she would say. "Just be patient with her." By the time Megan turned 21, patience was wearing thin. She had dropped to part-time status at college, spending more time shopping and partying than studying. Yet Mom continued defending her, and increasingly they formed an alliance of sorts, often whispering together, going quiet when I entered rooms. A week before everything fell apart, I overheard a conversation that should have been my warning. I was coming up from the basement after fixing the water heater when I heard them in the kitchen. "I just don't understand why he gets to have the biggest bedroom when he barely pays anything to live here," Megan was saying. This was a complete lie, as I paid far more than my share. "Well, it was his room growing up," Mom replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "So what I'm growing up too. And my friends can't even stay over because my room is so small. He doesn't even appreciate it. All he does is work and judge us." There was a long pause before Mom sighed. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time we rethink the arrangements around here." I should have confronted them, then cleared the air, defended myself. Instead, I quietly backed down the stairs and pretended I hadn't heard. Conflict avoidance was a trait I inherited from Dad. "Choose your battles," he always said. I chose wrong. That Friday, I left for a weekend IT security conference in Chicago. It was an important opportunity for networking and professional development. Before leaving, I cleaned my room thoroughly, did all my laundry, even left a note for Mom with my conference schedule and the hotel information. I thought maybe the time apart would cool things down, give everyone space to appreciate what we each contributed to the household. I remember calling home Saturday night, but no one answered. I sent a text to both Mom and Megan Hope. "Everything's okay. See you Sunday afternoon." Megan replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Mom sent back, "Drive safe." Nothing seemed amiss. Nothing prepared me for what was waiting. The conference ended early Sunday around noon. I drove straight from Chicago to Denver, about a 14-hour drive, stopping only for gas and quick meals. I was exhausted, but somehow excited to be home, looking forward to my own bed. I had even bought small gifts, a Chicago snow globe for Mom's collection and a university hoodie for Megan. Family peace offerings that would soon seem ridiculous. As I pulled into our driveway around 2 in the morning, I noticed all the lights were off except for Megan's room, except it wasn't her room light. It was mine. Too tired to think much of it, I assumed. She was just using my computer since hers was older. I had no idea I was about to walk into a completely different life than the one I had left just 3 days before. The house was quiet when I unlocked the front door. Moonlight spilled through the windows, illuminating the familiar shapes of our living room furniture. I set my suitcase down by the stairs, the small bag of gifts placed carefully on top. Despite the exhaustion of 14 hours on the road, I felt a sense of relief being home. I moved through the darkened house with the ease of someone who knows every creaking floorboard. Something felt different, though. Small things were out of place or missing entirely. The family photo where Dad had his arm around my shoulders was gone from the hallway wall. The coat rack no longer held my winter jacket. The strangeness continued as I climbed the stairs. The family photos had been rearranged with several featuring me conspicuously absent. A cold feeling began to spread through my chest, but I pushed it away. I was tired imagining things. Everything would make sense after a good night's sleep. When I reached the second-floor landing, I noticed light spilling from beneath my bedroom door. Assuming Megan had fallen asleep with my lamp on, I approached quietly, not wanting to wake her if she was just borrowing my space. I turned the knob slowly, expecting to find her curled up on my desk chair or maybe using my gaming system. What I found instead stopped me cold. My room, my space for 25 years was unrecognizable. The walls, once blue, were now painted a soft lavender. My bed remained, but with floral bedding instead of my gray comforter. My desk was gone, replaced by a vanity covered in makeup and jewelry. The bookshelves that once held my computer science textbooks and fantasy novels now displayed fashion magazines and small potted plants. And there in the center of what used to be my bed was Megan, fast asleep, her long hair spread across what used to be my pillow. She looked peaceful at home, as if this had always been her room. For several seconds I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what I was seeing. Then movement in the hallway caught my attention. Mom stood there in her bathrobe watching me, with an expression I had never seen before, part defensive, part defiant. "What's going on?" I whispered, gesturing helplessly at the transformed room. "Where's all my stuff?" Mom crossed her arms. "We needed to make some changes while you were gone." "Changes? You gutted my room. Where am I supposed to sleep?" Herr Chaza didn't waver. "We voted. You're out." Those 4 words hit me like physical blows. "We voted. You're out." As if my place in the family and my own home had been put to a democratic process, and I had lost the election without even knowing I was a candidate. "Who voted?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "You and Megan against me. That's not a fair vote. We discussed it with Aunt Linda and Uncle Paul, too. They agreed it's time you stood on your own feet. You're 25, Junior. Most men your age don't live with their mothers." The irony of this statement, when I had stayed specifically to help her, was not lost on me. Where are my things? My computer, my clothes. Everything I own was in that room. "In the garage," she replied coolly. "Packed up neatly. We didn't throw anything away." I pushed past her and headed downstairs, flipping on lights as I went. The garage door opened to reveal stacks of cardboard boxes labeled in Megan's handwriting: Junior clothes, Junior books, Junior computer stuff. My entire life boxed up and exiled to the garage like seasonal decorations no longer needed. As I began checking boxes frantically, I discovered several important items were missing or damaged. My collection of vintage comic books Dad and I had collected together was nowhere to be found. My custom gaming computer had been disassembled parts separated into different boxes. A framed photo of Dad and me fishing was cracked, the glass splintered. Looking for these, Megan's voice came from behind me. She stood in the doorway to the house, holding my comic book collection. "I figured you'd want to take the valuable stuff first." I stared at her, this stranger wearing my sister's face. Why was all I could manage? She shrugged. "I needed a bigger room. You're never home anyway, always working or whatever. Mom and I are actually here living in this house." She dropped the comic books onto a nearby box carelessly. "Besides, we gave you notice." Notice what notice? She gestured toward a small envelope tucked into one of the boxes. I opened it to find a formal eviction notice dated 2 weeks prior giving me 30 days to vacate. But I had never seen this before it had been backdated to make their actions appear legal. "This is the first I'm seeing this," I said, waving the paper. "You can't backdate an eviction notice and pretend you gave me warning." Mom appeared behind Megan. "We sent it to your email. Check your spam folder." I pulled out my phone, scrolled through emails. Nothing. No warning, no discussion, no chance to respond. They had planned this entire operation for the exact weekend I would be away executing it like a military coup. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that something inside me simply shut down. I had two choices: explode in rage or walk away with dignity. Dad's voice echoed in my head. "Son, never let anger make your decisions for you." I stood up straight, looked both of them in the eye, and said, "I understand. Give me an hour to pack what I can fit in my car." They seemed surprised by my calm response. Perhaps they had expected yelling, pleading, negotiation. Instead, I methodically began sorting through boxes, selecting essentials, clothes for work, toiletries, important documents, my disassembled computer, and the few family photos I could find that hadn't been removed or damaged. Mom and Megan watched for a few minutes, then retreated back into the house. I heard them whispering but couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. Whatever justifications they were crafting for themselves couldn't change what they had done. In 45 minutes I had packed my car to capacity. There was so much I had to leave behind: furniture, books, mementos from childhood, but material things suddenly seemed less important than escaping with my self-respect intact. I took one last look at the house I had grown up in, where Dad and I had tossed footballs in the backyard, where he had taught me to change oil in the driveway, where we had built my first computer together at the kitchen table. Now it felt as foreign as a stranger's home. I placed my house keys on the kitchen counter. Neither Mom nor Megan came to say goodbye. I turned around and walked out the front door without another word, closing it quietly behind me. As I started my car and backed out of the driveway for the last time, I realized I had left the Chicago gifts on my suitcase by the stairs. Let them find them later, I thought. Let them wonder if things could have been different. It was nearly 4 in the morning when I pulled away from the only home I had ever known, with no destination in mind and nowhere to go. The first week after being evicted from my family home exists in my memory as a blur of parking lots, fast food restrooms, and the uncomfortable reclined driver's seat of my Honda Civic. I had enough money saved for a motel, but some stubborn part of me refused to acknowledge my situation as real. Spending money on temporary housing felt like admitting this wasn't just a terrible misunderstanding that would soon be resolved. During days, I went to work as usual, showering at the gym near my office before my shifts. At night, I parked in different Walmart lots, following advice I found online about places where overnight parking was tolerated. I ate drive-through meals, charged my phone at work, and washed clothes at laundromats. I told no one what had happened, manufacturing excuses when coworkers asked why I looked tired or wore the same shirt twice in 1 week. By day 5, the reality of my situation had settled in like a physical weight. I sat in my car outside work, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for the loss of my home, but for the family I thought I had. The tears came violently, shaking my entire body, lasting until I had nothing left inside. Thomas, a coworker I had trained when he joined the company 6 months earlier, found me like that. He had been heading to his car when he spotted me, and concerned knocked on my window. I considered ignoring him, but in that moment of complete vulnerability, human connection felt like a lifeline. "Junior, you okay, man?" His face was pinched with genuine worry as I rolled down the window. I opened my mouth to offer some plausible explanation, but what came out instead was the unvarnished truth. My family kicked me out while I was at the conference. I've been living in my car. Thomas didn't hesitate. "Pack your stuff. You're staying with me tonight." His studio apartment was small but tidy. He insisted I take the bed while he slept on an air mattress. "Just until you figure things out," he said, waving away my protests. "My cousin stayed with me for 3 months when he got divorced. This is what people do for each other." That first night in a real bed after a week in my car, I slept for 12 straight hours. When I woke, Thomas had left for work but had sent a text. "Stay as long as you need. Spare key is in the kitchen drawer." The simple kindness of this relative stranger compared to the callousness of my own family unleashed a new wave of grief. I found myself oscillating between numbness, crushing sadness, and periods of intense anger. How could they discard me so easily, after everything I had done? How could Mom betray me when I had stayed specifically to support her after Dad died? My phone began ringing with calls from Mom within days of my departure. I let them all go to voicemail. The first messages were clipped and businesslike, informing me when I could pick up more of my belongings, asking when I would update my mailing address. No apologies, no explanations, just practical matters. Megan never called, but she posted prolifically on social media. Pictures of her new room upgrade appeared on Instagram, showing off the space that had been mine less than 2 weeks earlier. She had kept my wall-mounted television but replaced nearly everything else. In one photo, she posed on my former bed, captioning it, "Finally got the bedroom I deserve, blessed leveling up." Each post was a fresh wound. I finally blocked her accounts, unable to stomach more evidence of how easily I had been replaced, how thoroughly erased from the family narrative. Extended family began reaching out too clearly, having heard a version of events from Mom. Aunt Linda sent a text that read, "Your mother tells me you moved out rather abruptly. I hope you're not making rash decisions." Uncle Paul left a voicemail. "Junior, we all think it's time you stood on your own feet. Your dad would want you to be independent." Only Dad's brother, my Uncle Mike, seemed skeptical of the official story. He called one evening as I was helping Thomas prepare dinner. "Something doesn't add up," he said after I gave him the bare facts. "Rachel tells everyone, you just decided to move out with no warning, but that doesn't sound like you. What really happened?" His willingness to question the narrative broke something loose in me, and I found myself telling him everything. The backdated eviction notice coming home to find my room transformed the boxes in the garage. "Jesus," he breathed when I finished. "That's not right, Junior. Not right at all. Do you need money? A place to stay?" I thanked him but declined. Uncle Mike lived in Florida with his new wife, and their condo barely had room for the two of them. Besides, I had already decided to handle this on my own terms. After 2 weeks with Thomas, I found a small studio apartment I could afford. It was in a less desirable part of town with thin walls and questionable plumbing, but it was mine. Thomas helped me move the few possessions I had retrieved from my parents' garage. The space looked painfully empty with just my clothes computer and a second-hand mattress on the floor. "It's a start," Thomas said, looking around. "We'll hit some thrift stores this weekend, get you the basics." I threw myself into work, volunteering for extra shifts and projects. My boss noticed the change in my dedication and commented positively on it, unaware it stemmed from having nothing else in my life to focus on and nowhere else to be. I started putting every spare dollar toward rebuilding what I had lost: furniture, clothes, the small comforts that make a space feel like home. The process of replacing important belongings was both practical and emotional labor. Each purchase represented something taken from me. A new desk, a new bed frame, new winter boots because mine had mysteriously disappeared from the boxes. Each item restored a small piece of normalcy, but also reminded me of what had been taken. When the first holiday season arrived, invitations came from extended family for Thanksgiving dinner. I declined them all, unable to face questions about the family rift or risk running into Mom and Megan. Instead, I worked a double shift and ate turkey sandwiches with other employees who had volunteered to cover the holiday. Christmas was harder. Dad and I had always cut down a tree together, a tradition I had continued after his death. This year, I couldn't bear to set up even a small tree in my apartment. I worked Christmas Eve and spent Christmas Day alone watching movies on my laptop, ignoring the steady stream of family photos flooding social media. That night, Mom left her longest voicemail yet. "Junior, it's Christmas. I wish you would call. Megan misses you." The obvious lie about my sister almost made me laugh. "We saved your presents. Please come by sometime." This silence isn't helping anyone. I deleted the message without replying. The silence was helping me. In the quiet of my small apartment, I was slowly learning who I was apart from the role I had played in my family. The dutiful son, the replacement man of the house, the financial support, Without those identities, who was Junior Walker? It was a question that would take months to answer, but in that lonely Christmas night I made a promise to myself: whoever I became would be built on self-respect. I would never again allow myself to be used, taken for granted, or discarded by the people who should love me most. It was the first step toward healing, though the road ahead remained long and uncertain. 3 months after being voted out of my family home, I had established a new routine. My studio apartment, initially so stark and impersonal, had gradually transformed into a space that reflected me. Thrift store finds mixed with budget IKEA furniture created a comfortable if modest home. I had splurged on only one item: a quality mattress and bed frame. After weeks of sleeping in my car, followed by Thomas's spare bed and then a floor mattress, I decided a good night's sleep was worth the investment. My life developed a rhythm, independent of my former family obligations. I woke early, hit the gym before work, put in focused hours at the office, and spent evenings either advancing my IT certifications or socializing with a small but growing circle of friends. Thomas remained my closest friend, but I had begun connecting with others in my apartment building. Elena, a nursing student who lived across the hall. Marcus, a retired teacher who ran the building's small community garden. And Damon, a chef who worked nights and often shared leftover restaurant meals. These casual acquaintances slowly evolved into genuine friendships, particularly after I helped several neighbors resolve computer issues. "You should charge for this," Elena commented one evening as I removed malware from her laptop. "You could make decent side money." The idea took root, and I began offering basic tech support to people in the building and their friends, charging modest fees. The extra income helped accelerate my financial recovery, while the grateful feedback from clients provided emotional validation I hadn't realized I needed. Work became another source of unexpected growth. Without family responsibilities consuming my evenings and weekends, I poured extra energy into projects and professional development. 3 months after moving into my apartment, my manager called me into his office. "Junior, your performance these past few months has been exceptional," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "We're promoting you to Senior Security Specialist, effective immediately. It comes with a 20% salary increase." The promotion was a turning point. The substantial raise meant I could finally stop living paycheck to paycheck, begin rebuilding my savings, and occasionally indulge in small luxuries like restaurant meals or concert tickets. More importantly, it validated my capabilities outside the family context that had defined me for so long. Around this time, I also began therapy. Thomas had gently suggested it for weeks, finally saying, "The company insurance covers it, man. Just try 1 session. What's the worst that could happen?" Dr. Melissa Barrett, a compassionate therapist specializing in family trauma, helped me understand dynamics I had been too close to see. In our sessions, patterns emerged: how I had assumed Dad's responsibilities after his death, how Mom had transferred her dependency to me, how Megan's entitlement had been cultivated by both parents long before Dad died. "What you're describing," Dr. Barrett explained during our 3rd session, "is a family system that required you to play a specific role. When you begin to outgrow or question that role, the system pushes back to maintain its balance, even if that balance is unhealthy." These insights helped me recognize that the eviction, while cruel in execution, had perhaps been inevitable. I had been outgrowing the role of surrogate husband and father, focusing more on my own career and future. The system had ejected me rather than adapt. Dr. Barrett also introduced me to concepts of boundaries and emotional responsibility that transformed how I viewed relationships. "You're not responsible for managing other people's emotions," she emphasized repeatedly. "That includes your mother's grief and your sister's sense of entitlement." This framework helped me process the ongoing attempts at contact from my mother. Her voicemails had evolved from practical matters to guilt trips. "I don't understand why you're punishing us like this. And after everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me." I continued my policy of not responding, though each message stirred a complex mix of anger, guilt, and lingering grief for what our relationship had been. Dr. Barrett assured me that maintaining distance while I healed was not cruel but necessary, like keeping weight off a broken bone until it mends. 5 months after the eviction, I discovered through Facebook that my mother had been telling a very different story about my absence. My cousin Valerie messaged me, just had dinner with your mom and Megan. They said you abandoned them without warning, just moved out overnight because you wanted to live with friends. Is that true? The revelation that my mother had been actively lying hurt, but I chose not to counter with my version. Families are complicated, I replied to Valerie. I'm doing well and focusing on my career right now. This diplomatic response reflected my growing understanding that engaging in a public family dispute would only prolong my pain. I could not control their narrative, but I could control my response to it. A week later, an unexpected encounter shifted my perspective further. I was grocery shopping when I ran into Beverly Simmons, my mother's longtime friend from her hospital administration job. She seemed surprised but pleased to see me. "Junior, how are you? I haven't seen you since." "Well, since you moved out." Her hesitation suggested she knew something was amiss with the official story. We chatted briefly about my promotion and new apartment before she lowered her voice. "Listen, I've been concerned about your mom. She seems stressed and there are rumors about restructuring at the hospital." She paused. "And between us, I'm worried about Megan's influence. That boyfriend of hers is always at your house, and he doesn't seem to work." This was the first I'd heard about a boyfriend or potential financial problems. Beverly continued, unaware she was providing valuable intelligence. "Megan dropped out of college last month. Did you know your mom tried to keep it quiet, but she told me after a few glasses of wine. Said Megan wants to be an influencer instead." Beverly made air quotes around the word. "Between that and the boyfriend moving in, I wonder if your mom is doing okay financially without your contribution." I thanked Beverly for the update, keeping my response neutral, but her information rattled around in my head for days afterward. Megan had dropped out of college, the education Dad had worked so hard to fund for her. She had a boyfriend living in the house. Mom might be facing job insecurity. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction. Let them struggle without me. Let them face the consequences of pushing away the one person who had consistently supported them. But another part, the part that still remembered Dad's values, felt concerned despite everything. I mentioned these conflicted feelings to Dr. Barrett in our next session. "It's natural to care about people who hurt you," she said. "The challenge is distinguishing between healthy concern and falling back into caretaking patterns that weren't good for any of you." "So what should I do with this information?" I asked. "For now, nothing," she suggested. "Continue focusing on your own healing and growth. Their problems are not your emergency, especially when they haven't acknowledged their role in damaging your relationship." Her advice resonated, and I recommitted to my path of independence and self-discovery. I joined a weekend hiking group, started taking cooking classes at the community center, and even went on a few casual dates, though I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. 6 months after the eviction, I looked at my life and realized something surprising. I was happier, not because my family had rejected me, but because their rejection had forced me to build a life truly aligned with my own values and desires, rather than constructed around others' needs. The pain remained, but alongside it grew a steadily strengthening sense of self and purpose, independent of my role as son and brother. I had no way of knowing then that circumstances were about to shift dramatically, testing both my newfound strength and my capacity for compassion in ways I couldn't imagine. 6 months to the day after finding my room gutted and my place in the family revoked, I received an unexpected letter that would alter the trajectory of my life once again. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope with a law firm's name embossed in the corner, Harrington Wells and Associates. My first thought was that Mom was suing me for some imagined offense. With trepidation, I opened it to discover something entirely different. My great-uncle, Harold, Dad's eccentric uncle, who had made a fortune in real estate, had passed away. To my complete shock, he had left me a substantial inheritance, $300,000, and a small rental property in Colorado Springs. I had met Uncle Harold only a handful of times at family reunions. He was a character, always wearing bow ties and telling inappropriate jokes. Dad had kept in touch with him, but I had no idea Harold even knew who I was, let alone would include me in his will. The lawyer's letter explained Mr. Harold Walker specifically noted that he was impressed by your work ethic and dedication to family following your father's passing. He believed these qualities should be rewarded. I sat on my second-hand couch letter, trembling in my hands. The inheritance wasn't vast wealth by any measure, but to someone who had been rebuilding from scratch, It represented extraordinary freedom and opportunity. After the initial shock wore off, I made two decisions that would define the next phase of my life. First, I would use part of the inheritance to start the business I had been quietly dreaming about, Walker Security Solutions, specializing in cybersecurity for small businesses who couldn't afford enterprise-level protection. Second, I would maintain complete secrecy about the inheritance. No social media announcements, no lifestyle upgrades visible to extended family. Nothing that would alert my mother or sister to my changed circumstances. This wasn't primarily about keeping the money from them, though I had no intention of bailing them out, but about protecting my peace during this new beginning. Within weeks, I had established Walker Security Solutions as a legitimate LLC, created a professional website, and secured my first 3 clients through connections at work and referrals from Thomas, who enthusiastically supported the venture. I continued my day job while building the business nights and weekends, sleeping less, but energized by the purpose and potential. To my surprise, the business took off quickly. Small businesses were increasingly concerned about cybersecurity but overwhelmed by complex, expensive solutions designed for large corporations. My approach simplified security packages, with clear explanations and personal service, filled a market gap perfectly. By the 7-month mark after the eviction, I had 10 regular clients and had hired a part-time assistant to help with administrative tasks. By 8 months, I was considering whether to take the business full-time. As my professional life flourished, my mother's voicemails increased in both frequency and desperation. The tone had shifted again from guilt trips to hints of crisis. "Junior, I know you're still angry, but I really need to talk to you about a family matter. Then, the house needs some repairs I can't afford right now. I'm not asking for money, just advice. And later, please call me back. Things are becoming difficult here." Each message now ended with some variation of, "We made a mistake. I made a mistake." These admissions came without specifics, without real acknowledgement of what they had done or how it had affected me. They felt less like genuine remorse and more like tactical concessions intended to re-engage me as a problem solver and provider. Through mutual friends and family, I began hearing more about their deteriorating situation. My mother had indeed lost her job in a hospital restructuring. Megan's boyfriend Jason had moved in, permanently contributing nothing financially, while apparently consuming considerable resources. The house had developed plumbing issues that remained unrepaired. Bills were piling up. I listened to these reports with a mixture of emotions: concern for my mother, frustration at the predictable consequences of choices made, and if I'm honest, a small sense of satisfaction that the family system was failing without my one stabilizing presence. 8 months after the eviction, a particularly troubling voicemail arrived. "Junior, I know you don't want to talk to me, but we're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is sending letters about foreclosure. I don't know what to do. We made a mistake. Please help us." That night, I discussed the situation with Dr. Barrett in an emergency therapy session. "What are you feeling when you consider helping them?" she asked after I played the voicemail for her. "Conflicted," I admitted. "Part of me wants to help because that's who Dad raised me to be. But another part is afraid of being pulled back into the same dysfunctional patterns. And honestly, there's also anger that they only want me back now that they need something." "Those are all valid feelings," she assured me. "The question isn't whether you should help, that's entirely your choice, but how you might help without compromising your boundaries or well-being." This framing shifted my perspective. Perhaps there was a way to offer assistance without sacrificing the healthy independence I had built. That weekend, I made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable months earlier. I contacted a financial advisor to discuss using some of my inheritance to purchase my family's mortgage from the bank. It wasn't a gift or a bailout. I would become their lender with legal protections for myself and conditions they would need to meet. The process took 2 weeks to arrange. During that time, my mother's voicemails reached a peak of 59 messages, each beginning with some variation of 12. We made a mistake before detailing another aspect of their financial crisis. I saved each one without responding a digital record of the reversal in our positions. Meanwhile, I continued growing my business, now up to 15 clients, and considering hiring another technical specialist. I had moved to a larger 1-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, bought my first new car, and even started dating someone seriously. Alexandra, a graphic designer I met through a client who understood my family situation and supported my cautious approach to reconnection. Whatever you decide about your family, she told me one evening as we discussed the mortgage plan, I'm with you. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, not out of obligation or guilt. 9 months to the day after finding my room gutted and my sister sleeping in my bed, I finally called my mother back. The phone rang 5 times before she answered, her voice small and uncertain. "Junior, is that really you?" "It's me, Mom." What followed was a conversation that flowed through tears, halting explanations, and desperate apologies. She described their financial collapse, the job loss, Megan's withdrawal from college, mounting debts, the boyfriend who ate their food but contributed nothing. "We're going to lose the house," she concluded, sobbing. "Your father's house. I've ruined everything." I listened without interrupting, allowing her to empty out months of accumulated fear and regret. When she finally quieted, I spoke the words I had carefully prepared. "I bought your mortgage from the bank yesterday." Silence on the line then. "What? How could you possibly? What does that mean?" "It means I'm now your lender. You won't lose the house to foreclosure." I paused to let that sink in, but I have conditions. I could almost hear her mental calculations, weighing relief against wariness of what I might demand. "What conditions?" "3 things. First, you agree to family therapy with me, weekly sessions for at least 6 months. Second, Megan and her boyfriend move out within 30 days. Third, I help you find a new job using my business connections, and you accept whatever reasonable position we find." "But where would Megan go? She doesn't have money for her own place." "That's not my problem to solve," I replied, my voice firm but not unkind. "She's 22 years old. She made her choices. Jason has family in Denver, or they can figure something out together. My conditions aren't negotiable." Another long pause before she asked, "And if I agree to everything, what happens with the mortgage?" "You'll make affordable monthly payments directly to me. Once you're financially stable again, we can discuss transferring the mortgage back to a bank. This isn't about owning you, Mom. It's about helping while ensuring I'm not taken advantage of again." She began crying once more, but these tears sounded different, a release of tension rather than an escalation of distress. "We really did make a terrible mistake, Junior. I let Megan manipulate me after your father died. I was so lost without him, and she filled the void with constant attention, constant validation. I chose wrong, and I've regretted it every day since you left." It was the first genuine acknowledgement I had heard from her, the first, that didn't feel like manipulation or a means to an end. Something small and tender unfurled in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but its distant precursor. "I know, Mom," I said quietly. "We all made mistakes. Now we have a chance to do better." As we ended the call with arrangements to meet in person, I felt neither triumph nor anxiety, but a calm certainty that whatever happened next, I was approaching it from a position of strength, clarity, and self-respect that would have been impossible 9 months earlier. The family that had voted me out would not be the same family I cautiously allowed back into my life. The difference was not just in our circumstances, but in who I had become during our separation, someone whose value and boundaries were no longer negotiable regardless of blood ties or shared history. Our first face-to-face meeting after 9 months of separation took place at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop, halfway between my new apartment and my childhood home. I arrived early, choosing a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. As I waited, I rehearsed the points I needed to make, the boundaries I needed to maintain, just as Dr. Barrett and I had practiced in our preparatory session. When Mom walked through the door, I almost didn't recognize her. She had lost weight, her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and her normally perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She spotted me immediately, but approached hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Junior," she said, her voice catching. She made an aborted gesture toward a hug, then stopped herself, reading my body language correctly. Instead, she slid into the seat opposite me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Thank you for coming," I replied, formally pushing a coffee I had ordered for her across the table. "Hazelnut latte, extra shot, just how you like it." The small gesture, remembering her coffee preference, brought tears to her eyes. You remembered. Mom, I was gone 9 months, not 9 years. I remember everything. Those words hung between us, carrying the weight of all that had transpired. I remembered the good her nursing me through childhood illnesses, cheering at my high school graduation, her fierce love for our family. But I also remembered waking up in my car the first night after the eviction, realizing I had nowhere to go, the betrayal still fresh and raw. She nodded, understanding the dual meaning. I deserve that. I deserve your anger. This isn't about punishment, I clarified. It's about rebuilding on honest foundations. I need to know you understand what happened and why it can never happen again. What followed was the most brutally honest conversation we had ever shared. Mom described the months after Dad died, her depression, her fear of being alone, her growing dependence on Megan's constant presence and validation. Megan, sensing this vulnerability, had gradually positioned herself as the primary relationship in Mom's life, subtly undermining my contributions and painting my increasing focus on work as abandonment. She would say things like, Junior doesn't really want to be here, he's just staying out of obligation, or, he resents supporting us. At first I defended you, but over time, she looked down at her untouched coffee. Over time I started to believe her version, because it was easier than facing my own fears of being truly alone. And the room, the eviction. That was Megan's idea too, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mom's face flushed with shame. She suggested it initially, yes. Said you were never home anyway, that she deserved the bigger room, that you could afford your own place. But I agreed to it, Junior. I let it happen. I helped plan it for when you were away. She met my eyes directly. I can blame Megan for many things, but not for my own choices. I failed you as a mother. Her accountability was unexpected and disarming. I had prepared for defensiveness, for partial admissions of guilt, for attempts to share blame. This complete ownership of her actions left me momentarily without a script. Why now? I finally asked. Why the sudden insight after 9 months? Is it just because you need financial help? Her flinch told me the question had struck home. I would be lying if I said our situation hasn't forced me to reevaluate everything, but the regret started almost immediately. The house felt wrong without you. Your empty room, even after Megan took it over, was a constant reminder. I kept expecting to hear your key in the lock, your voice calling out that you were home. She wiped at her eyes. I just didn't know how to reach out, how to apologize for something so unforgivable. And then, as things got worse financially, it became even harder because any apology would seem self-serving. I nodded, understanding the paradox. And Megan, where does she stand in all this? Mom's expression tightened. She's angry. About everything. About the conditions you've set, about me agreeing to therapy, about the possibility of her having to move out. She and Jason had a huge fight when I told them. He left yesterday, said he was going to stay with his brother until they figure things out. And what do you think about my conditions? I asked carefully. They're fair, she said, without hesitation. More than fair, considering. The therapy scares me. I'm afraid of what might come out of facing all the ways I've failed, but I know we need it. She paused. As for Megan moving out, that will be hard. She doesn't have much savings, and without Jason contributing, she stopped herself. But that's not your problem to solve, like you said. She's an adult. She made her choices. Hearing my own words repeated back to me confirmed that Mom had truly listened during our phone conversation. It was a small but significant indicator of her willingness to change. We spent the next hour discussing practical matters, the mortgage payments she would make to me, potential job opportunities through my business network, the logistics of family therapy. Throughout the conversation, I maintained a careful, emotional distance. Cordial, but not warm. Helpful, but not over-involved. Dr. Barrett had emphasized the importance of this stance: support, without enmeshment, assistance, without rescuing. As our meeting drew to a close, Mom asked the question I had been expecting. Will you come to the house, just to see it, maybe talk to Megan? Not yet, I replied honestly. I'm not ready to be in that space again, and I don't think a conversation with Megan would be productive right now. She accepted this without argument, another small sign of respect for my boundaries. We agreed to meet again the following week this time, With the family therapist, I had selected Dr. Lydia Cohen, who specialized in family estrangement and reconciliation. Our first therapy session was as difficult as expected. Megan refused to attend, so it was just Mom and me in Dr. Cohen's warmly lit office. The initial session focused on establishing a timeline of events and identifying key patterns in our family dynamic, particularly how Dad's death had created a vacuum that each of us had tried to fill in different, ultimately conflicting ways. Rachel. Dr. Cohen addressed my mother. It sounds like you transferred many of your emotional needs from your husband to your children after his death, particularly to Junior, in terms of practical support, and to Megan for emotional dote. Validation. Would you say that's accurate? Mom nodded tearfully. I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but yes, I expected Junior to be the man of the house in all the practical ways, while looking to Megan for the constant companionship Frank used to provide. And Junior, Dr. Cohen, turned to me. You tried to fulfill that role out of love and obligation, but it came at a cost to your own development and independence. Yes, I agreed. I thought I was doing what Dad would have wanted, but I was enabling unhealthy patterns for all of us. These insights, while painful, created a framework for understanding what had gone wrong and how we might rebuild differently. We established a weekly therapy schedule and set initial goals focused on healthy communication and boundary setting. Meanwhile, true to my word, I leveraged my business contacts to help Mom find employment. A client of Walker Security Solutions needed an office manager with healthcare administrative experience, a perfect match for Mom's background. After a successful interview, she was offered the position with a salary that, while lower than her hospital administration role, would allow her to cover basic expenses once she adjusted her lifestyle. 2 weeks after our coffee shop meeting, Megan finally contacted me not with an apology, but with a furious text message. Congratulations on destroying what's left of our family. Mom's making me move out because of your ultimatum. Where am I supposed to go? I waited a full day before responding, consulting with Dr. Barrett to ensure my reply maintained boundaries while avoiding unnecessary antagonism. This isn't about punishing you, Megan. It's about everyone taking responsibility for their own lives and choices. I'm happy to talk when you're ready to have an honest conversation about what happened. She didn't reply, but 3 days later, Mom reported that Megan had found an apartment to share with 2 former college classmates. She had grudgingly accepted financial help from Mom for the security deposit money that came from Mom's first paycheck at her new job, not from me. A month after our initial reunion, I finally agreed to visit the house. Walking through the front door felt surreal, simultaneously familiar and foreign, like returning to an elementary school as an adult. Everything looked smaller, shabbier than in my memory. Mom had returned my old room to something resembling its former state, purchasing a new bed and desk, since my original furniture had been sold or given away during the eviction. The gesture, while appreciated, highlighted the permanence of certain losses. Material items could be replaced, but the sense of security and belonging that had been violated could not be so easily restored. It's not the same, Mom acknowledged as we stood awkwardly in the doorway of what had once been my sanctuary. But if you ever wanted to stay over for any reason, this room is yours again. I nodded, recognizing the offer for what it was, not an expectation of my return, but a symbolic relinquishing of the space that had been taken from me. Thank you. I don't think I'll be staying overnight anytime soon, but I appreciate knowing the option exists. That evening, as I prepared to leave after a cautious dinner together, Mom handed me a small box. I saved these, she said. When we packed up your room, I kept aside the things I knew were irreplaceable. Inside were my father's watch, the fishing lures we had made together, and a handful of photographs I had assumed were lost forever. The simple act of preservation, evidence that some part of her had known even then that what they were doing was wrong, moved me more than any apology could have. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with unexpected emotion. This means a lot. As I drove back to my apartment that night, I realized that while the wounds of betrayal might never fully heal, they had begun to scar over. The acute pain had subsided, replaced by a more manageable ache and surprisingly small tendrils of hope for a different kind of relationship moving forward. One built on mutual respect, rather than dependency on choice, rather than, Obligation. The path ahead remained uncertain, particularly regarding Megan, who continued to resist therapy and direct communication. But for the first time since walking away from my gutted room 9 months earlier, I could envision a future that included some form of family connection without sacrificing the independence and self-respect I had fought so hard to establish. 1 year after finding my room gutted and being told, "We voted. You're out," I stood in the kitchen of my newly purchased townhouse unpacking dishes with Alexandra. We had been dating for 6 months, and while she maintained her own apartment, she spent most weekends helping me settle into my new home, the first property I had ever owned. "Where do you want these glasses?" she asked, holding up a set of tumblers my mother had given me as a housewarming gift. "Top shelf left cabinet," I replied, smiling at how seamlessly she had integrated into my life. Alexandra knew my full story had supported me through the complex process of reconnecting with my family and understood the significance of this milestone. Buying a home represented not just financial stability but a reclaiming of the security that had been stripped from me a year earlier. The journey to this point had been neither simple nor linear. Family therapy continued weekly for the first 6 months, then bi-weekly, as we established healthier patterns of communication and interaction. Mom had flourished in her new job, eventually being promoted to senior office manager with a comfortable salary. Our relationship had evolved into something unexpected, a friendship between adults rather than the tangled web of dependency and obligation that had characterized our previous dynamic. We spoke on the phone twice weekly, had Sunday dinner together every other week, and maintained clear boundaries that respected my independence while nurturing our reconnection. The mortgage arrangement continued, with Mom making regular payments that we both tracked transparently. The business aspect of our relationship, rather than complicating the personal side, actually helped establish a foundation of mutual respect and accountability. My business, Walker Security Solutions, had grown beyond my initial expectations. I now employed 5 people full-time and had moved into dedicated office space. The inheritance from Uncle Harold had provided the initial capital, but the company's success stemmed from my own expertise and work ethic qualities Dad had instilled in me that had ultimately created my path to independence. The most complex aspect of family reconciliation involved Megan. For the first few months after moving out of Mom's house, she refused all contact with me and attended only 2 therapy sessions before declaring the process a waste of time. She struggled financially, cycling through roommates and part-time jobs, while still clinging to her influencer ambitions despite modest follower counts. The turning point in our estrangement came unexpectedly. 8 months after her move, Megan's apartment building suffered a fire. No one was injured, but she lost most of her possessions and had nowhere to go. Against the advice of both Alexandra and Dr. Barrett, I offered her the guest room in my previous apartment until she could find new housing. "Are you sure about this?" Alexandra had asked. "Given your history, it seems risky." "I'm not doing it out of obligation," I explained. "I'm doing it because I can, because it's what Dad would have done, and because it's who I want to be, someone who helps family in crisis without being exploited by them." Megan stayed for 3 weeks, an awkward arrangement that nonetheless forced conversations we had been avoiding. Late one night, finding her crying at the kitchen table, I finally heard her side of the story without defensive filters. "I was jealous of you," she admitted, not meeting my eyes. "After Dad died, you became this perfect son, handling everything while I felt useless and forgotten. Mom leaned on you for practical stuff, but turned to me for emotional support, making me feel like that was all I had to offer. Taking your room was about claiming space importance." She looked up, then tears streaming down her face. "It was wrong. We were wrong. I see that now." The admission wasn't a magical fix, but it opened a door to gradual rebuilding. Megan found a new apartment, enrolled in community college classes, and began attending therapy on her own. Our relationship remained fragile, tentative, but it existed something I wouldn't have thought possible in those first dark days after the eviction. In my new townhouse, I designated one of the 3 bedrooms as a guest room. Alexandra teased me about it, calling it the just-in-case room. Just in case, what she asked as we assembled the bed. "Just in case Megan needs a place to stay again," I admitted. "Or just in case Mom needs somewhere to live when she's older. Just in case family becomes family again." Alexandra kissed me on the cheek. "You're a good man, Junior Walker." "I'm trying to be," I replied, "like my dad was." The healing process taught me lessons I never expected to learn at 26. I discovered that forgiveness isn't a single decision but a daily choice, one that benefits the forgiver more than the forgiven. I learned that loving family doesn't mean sacrificing self-respect or enabling harmful behavior. Most importantly, I realized that the true measure of strength isn't how much you can endure but knowing when to walk away and when to offer second chances. Dr. Barrett helped me see that the betrayal, painful as it was, had accelerated my journey toward authentic adulthood. "Sometimes the worst experiences force the growth we've been resisting," she observed in one of our final sessions. "You might have stayed in that caretaker role for years longer without such a dramatic rupture." She was right. The family that voted me out did me a favor, though not in the way they intended. They freed me to discover who Junior Walker was beyond his family role, beyond his obligations, beyond the narrow identity of the responsible son. What they meant for harm ultimately led to a more genuine, self-directed life than I might otherwise have achieved. Dad would have been proud, I think. Not of how I was cast out, nor of how Mom and Megan behaved, but of how I responded with dignity, resilience, and eventually measured compassion. He always said character is revealed in crisis. I hope the character I revealed would have met with his approval. 1 year after that devastating homecoming, I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had built in its aftermath: a successful business, a loving relationship, a new home, and yes, even a cautiously reconstructed family connection built on choice rather than obligation. The room that had been gutted was replaced by rooms of my own creation. The belongings that had been boxed up and exiled to the garage were replaced by possessions that reflected my true self rather than my family role. The security that had been violated was rebuilt on a foundation of self-knowledge and hard-won wisdom. I still have all 59 voicemails saved in a folder on my phone. Sometimes when I need a reminder of how far we've all come, I listen to the progression from the first coldly practical messages to the final desperate pleas that began with, "We made a mistake." They serve as both cautionary tale and evidence of change. Family, I've learned, is not just about blood or shared history. It's a set of relationships that must be continually chosen, nurtured, and sometimes reconfigured when old patterns prove destructive. The family I have now: Mom, in a healthier role; Megan working toward maturity; Alexandra as chosen family friends who showed up when blood relatives failed, is stronger precisely because it has been tested, broken, and mindfully rebuilt. For those of you watching who might be facing your own family betrayals or difficult choices about relationships that cause more pain than joy, I offer this hard-won wisdom: sometimes walking away is the most loving choice you can make. Loving toward yourself, and ultimately toward those who need to face the consequences of their actions. But I also believe in the possibility of redemption and rebuilding when genuine remorse meets genuine forgiveness. What has your experience been with family rifts and reconciliation? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family dynamics? Did you eventually reconnect, or was permanent separation to the healthier choice? Share your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and rebuilding after betrayal. And remember, family should be where you find support, not where you sacrifice your dignity. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to rebuilding. I hope it helps someone else find their own path forward.